I received a letter from someone I've never met who asked me to deal with the implications of eschatology. How does a person's view of the future, how does one's end-time theology affect the way he or she lives in this world? So I'm putting this together as part of that request. I think it's an important thing to do in addition to studying what the Bible has to say about eschatology, what the Bible says about the end times. I believe it's important to deal with the implications of a person's eschatological position. I'm going to be dealing with this in a number of ways. First, I'm going to talk a little bit about how other systems, some non-Christian systems, deal with the issue of eschatology, their view of the future, their view of how the future is going to unfold. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about how the Christian view of eschatology in the 20th century has been really corrupted by I believe, a false eschatological position, and actually has had a detrimental effect upon the Christian witness in the world. Then talk a little bit about some 20th century date setting, and then finally I'm going to deal with a couple of biblical passages I think are important. I think they're very crucial in understanding how to deal with prophecy. People always say, well, how should I interpret prophecy? Should I interpret it literally? That comes down to how we understand the word literal. So these four parts I hope to get through and to give you some idea of my perspective on this. And being asked to do this, what came about was an article that was published. It was posted November 2nd, right after the November 2nd, 2010 election. And it was an article written by Frank Schaeffer. Many of you may know Frank Schaeffer, better known Frankie Schaeffer. He's the son of the late Francis Schaeffer, and Francis Schaeffer was involved throughout the 70s and 80s in really bringing Christians back to a comprehensive biblical worldview, showing how the Bible applies to every area of life. He and his son, Frankie, was involved in the film production side of all of this, but somewhere along the line, Frankie Schaeffer went astray and dropped out of the evangelical world. This article that I'm quoting from is his reaction to the election that took place on November 2nd, 2010. He says, one reason the Republicans won on Tuesday is because many of their supporters have already given up on this world and are waiting for the next. I know. I used to be one of them. And he goes on and he says, Jerry Jenkins and Tim LaHaye's Left Behind series of 16 volumes so far represents everything that is most deranged about religion. It also is a reason and symptom of the hysteria that grips so many conservatives in the Republican Party. Frankly, to borrow from Jon Stewart, they do believe that these are the end times, not just hard times. And so Frankie Schaeffer was someone who was on the inside. Frankie Schaeffer's eschatological position at that particular time is very similar to many Christians today, and I'll talk a little bit about that. But I do believe there are lots of Christians out there who are under the impression that we are living in the end times, that this is the last generation right before Jesus is going to come back, and all the signs seem to be pointing to that. And this isn't a new theory at all. You will find throughout the history of the church that people have believed that their generation was the last generation. They saw famines, they saw earthquakes, they saw false prophets and false Christs. The history of the church is the history of people telling us that the end was near for their day. And it's no different today. Now the question we as Christians have to ask is this a biblical view? Are we really living in the last days? I want to demonstrate that not only do Christians have an eschatological position, but other contrary worldviews have an eschatological position too. They have a view of the future. So let's look at a couple of important issues here. Why is eschatology important? The word eschatology is a fancy word which simply means the study of future things, the study of the last times. And everybody has a view of the future. And a person's view of the future will determine how he or she will live in the present and plan for the future. And the Bible is filled with prophetic material. Some have said that the Bible has approximately 25% of it written in terms of prophecy. So to neglect the study of Bible prophecy is to neglect 25% of the Bible, and we can't do that. We can't say, well, look, I don't want to have to deal with eschatology. It's too controversial, like what isn't, and it's just something I don't understand. Well, by doing that, you dismiss 25% of the Bible. And the problem with that is, if there were just a section of the Bible, 25% of it, that you could put aside, then I could say, well, maybe you have a right to do that. But in reality, prophecy is mixed in with history, mixed in with ethics, mixed in with the rise and fall of nations. There is no easy way to extract that 25% and put it aside. It affects too many other things. Other doctrines are woven into prophetic texts. Prophecy does not stand on its own. Now, the next point I want to deal with is to show that there are competing eschatologies. Just because we've adopted an eschatology that we say we're living in the end times, Jesus is coming back soon, and as a result of that, there's nothing that you and I can do to make changes in this world. We're just going to sit back and wait for Jesus to return to rapture us out, or whatever position that you take on this, because these are in fact the end. These are the end times. And again, as I mentioned to you, history is filled with this type of idea, and I believe it's had an effect on our world. It's had an effect on where we are in our world today. We have fallen into the trap that a communist, as the name of Antonio Gramsci said, he says that what the secularists have to do is to engage in a long march through the institutions, to go into every area of society and begin to take over every area of society. And in so doing, you capture the future by capturing the present. Christians, on the other hand, said, we don't want to bother with any of that. This world belongs to the devil. It's about to be burned up with fire. Why would we want to engage in changing our culture? And so everything that we do as cultural changers is simply just keeping ahead of the latest secularist idea, the next implication of what it means to be a secularist, because we're holding the fort down. Jesus is going to come and rescue us, but it hasn't happened. And it may be because we have our eschatology wrong. So let's look at a couple of competing worldviews and see how they take eschatology very seriously. The first is communism. And I've gotten this from a book by Francis Nigel Lee. The name of the book is Communist Eschatology. Now, who would write a book about communist eschatology? Most people don't even know what eschatology means. But the very driving force behind communism has always been its eschatology, has always been its view of the future. And here's what Francis Nigel Lee writes. Communism, even though it also offers an explanation of the past and the present, and indeed of everything in the universe, is nevertheless especially a program for the future. With restless movement, communism, as seen by the communists, stretches forward toward the attainment of the future perfection of man and nature, toward the future realization of the last things. By communist eschatology, we then mean particularly the communist view of the process of communism's progressive conquest of the world after the advent of the proletarian revolution, even as by Christian eschatology we mean particularly the Christian view of the process of Christ's progressive conquest of the whole world after the advent of Christ's resurrection. So the communists have actually borrowed the Christian idea of eschatology. And in the first century, Jesus had 12 disciples and changed the world with 12 disciples because they believed in the progressive nature of the message of the gospel. And over the years, of course, we haven't believed in this progressive nature. We've simply believed that while we are here, we are to be faithful to God, simply sit into our churches, be fed on the Word of God, and as a result of that, we will be fixed on the premise that Jesus is coming back soon because all the signs point to that. And while that's been taking place, you've had the communists applying their eschatology in every area of life. Nazism, for example, in Adolf Hitler's Mein Kampf, he stressed the importance of winning over and then training the youth in the service of a new national state. When an opponent declares, "I will not come over to your side," Hitler said in a speech on November 6, 1933, "I calmly say, your child belongs to us already. What are you? You will pass on. Your descendants, however, now stand in the new camp, and in a short time they will know nothing else but this new community." And later, in 1937, Hitler declared, "This new Reich will give its youth to no one, but will itself take youth and give to youth its own education and its own upbringing." So Nazism too had an eschatology. We hear about a 1,000-year Reich. Humanism, John Dunphy, who is a self-devout secular humanist, and he's best known for this statement, first published in 1983 in the Humanist magazine. He says, "I am convinced that the battle for humankind's future must be waged and won in the public school classroom by teachers who correctly perceive their role as the proselytizers of a new faith, a religion of humanity that recognizes and respects the spark of what theologians call divinity in every human being. These teachers must embody the same selfless dedication as the most rabid fundamentalist preachers, for they will be ministers of another sort, utilizing a classroom instead of a pulpit to convey humanist values in whatever subject they teach, regardless of the educational level, preschool, daycare, or large state university. The classroom must and will become an arena of conflict between the old and the new, the rotting corpse of Christianity, together with all its adjacent evils and misery, and the new faith of humanism, resplendent in its promise of a world in which the never realized ideal of love thy neighbor will be finally achieved." So here you have these competing worldviews that have a very aggressive view of the future. They understand that the future has to be grasped, it has to be worked in the present. Christians, on the other hand, have a view of the future that says, no, we must hold on. What we see around us is a prophetic inevitability that we can do nothing to change. Islam, for example, today Tehran, tomorrow the world. Another statement, "I have complete faith that Islam will invade Europe and America because Islam has logic and a mission." One more, "The wave of the Islamic revolution will soon reach the entire world." So how do Christians respond to all of these, especially Islam? These are signs of the end. But we have to remember that the history of the church is the history of this type of these types of movements. The church has always been confronted by contrary worldviews that have had a secular, humanist-minded eschatology. It's no different today. In our next lesson, we're going to look at we're going to compare some modern-day prophetic beliefs and how they are impacting on our culture today.